Okay. Well, this is the outline of the book that we've been following here. We've covered the first section of the prologue of chapters 1 and 2, and now we've gone into this long section from chapter 3 through to chapter 27, where we have this cycle of speeches between Job and his three friends. And we began this looking in Job chapter 3, which begins with Job's lament. Job expressing his wish that he had never been born, his wish that he could die. And then in response to that, the first of the speeches was that made by Eliphaz in chapter 4. So this is a more detailed breakdown here of the section that we're in. So we have Job's lament in chapter 3, and then this first round of speeches where we have the friends taking turns in making a speech, and then Job replying to each of those in turn. So last week we looked at Eliphaz's first speech in chapters 4 and 5, and this evening we're going to be looking at Job's reply to that speech. So Job's response to Eliphaz's speech is really an outburst of emotions as he seeks to defend himself against the accusations of his friends that they're suggesting that he must have done something wrong, and that's why he's suffering these things, that he's reaping what he has sown. That was the principle Eliphaz was talking about, people reap what they sow, and that God was using his suffering as a way to discipline him. But as far as Job is concerned, none of this is true. So an outline of Job's reply here in these two chapters, chapter 6, verses 1 to 7, Job expresses his anguish at the situation. And then again in verses 8 to 13, he once again expresses his wish to die. He then in chapter 6, verses 14 to 30, expresses his disappointment at his friends who are supposed to be there to help him. And then going into chapter 7, Job reflecting upon his life and saying that it all ends in nothing. And then in verses 11 to 21, Job makes this direct address to God in which he sets out his complaint to God. So the first part of his speech here is in chapter 6, verses 1 to 7. So we'll read these verses. Job chapter 6, verses 1 to 7. And remember, this we've just had in the previous two chapters, Eliphaz replying to Job's statement in chapter 3, where Job expressed his wish to die. Eliphaz then responds to that in chapters 4 and 5. And now we have Job's reply to Eliphaz. Chapter 6, verse 1 begins, Then Job said in reply, If my anguish were weighed, my full calamity laid on the scales, it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. That is why I spoke recklessly. For the arrows of the Almighty are in me, my spirit absorbs their poison. God's terrors are arrayed against me. Does a wild ass bray when he has grass? Does a bull bellow over his fodder? Can what is tasteless be eaten without salt? Does mallow juice have any flavour? I refuse to touch them. They are like food when I am sick. Job begins here by admitting that his words in chapter 3, had been reckless or rash or impetuous, some of the other versions put it. So if he has spoken in this way, recklessly or irrationally, then he explains that this is because of the weight of the anguish and the calamity that he is suffering. That when you're suffering something, you speak perhaps out of turn, you speak perhaps a bit recklessly. And he says that if his distress were to be weighed on the scales, it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. So if you could put his distress on one side of the balance and the sand of the sea on the other side of the balance, well, his distress would be greater. The sand of the sea is a figure that's used for that which is immeasurable. Do you remember God told Abraham that he would make his descendants like the sand of the sea, something beyond measure. So Job is suggesting here that his calamity, his distress is something which you could not measure, put it in the scales, and the sand of the sea on the other side of the scales, and his calamity would be even greater. And Job likens his afflictions here to God's poisonous arrows. He says, "For the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit absorbs their poison." This picture of God shooting arrows at people is found in Psalm 38 and verse 3 as well. So I think that may be the wrong reference I've got there. Yeah, I can't. I think I've got the wrong reference down there. Yeah, no, we'll move on from there. So we'll forget that for the moment. But there is a reference in the Psalms to God firing arrows at people.
It's verse 2.
Oh, sorry. Margaret's told me it's Psalms 38, verse 2. Yeah, let's have a look there. Psalm 38, verse 2. Yeah, that's right. For thy arrows have sunk into me, and thy hand has come down on me. So again, there, David in that psalm, speaking of God firing arrows at him. So when Job speaks in this way, the arrows of the Almighty are in me, it seems that God is terrorizing Job. Job then asks a series of rhetorical questions. Does a wild ass bray when he has grass? Does a bull bellow over his fodder? The answer would be no. Animals do not cry out when they are being fed and when they're being provided for. And so Job's cry of anguish then is his natural response to all that he's going through. For one who has been provided for one who is suffering in the way that he has, his cry of anguish is that natural response. It's not clear exactly what Job is referring to now in verses 6 and 7. It's a bit difficult with the translation here. Some commentators think that he's likening Eliphaz's argument to something that has no flavour. In verse 6, he asks, "Can what is tasteless be eaten without salt? Does mallow juice have any flavour?" The Authorized Version translates that last phrase as, "Is there any taste in the white of an egg?" The meaning of the original Hebrew word translated as mallow there is, or egg, is something that is uncertain, other than to say that it seems to be referring to something that is tasteless. So Job perhaps is rejecting these tasteless arguments. He says, "I refuse to touch them. They are like food when I'm sick." When you're sick, you don't feel like eating, and that's this may be suggesting that he has no real appetite for Eliphaz's words, or that more generally he's lost his taste for life. But Job then goes on in verses 8 to 13 to once again express his wish to die. He says here, "Would that my request were granted, that God gave me what I wished for. Would that God consented to crush me, loosed his hand and cut me off. Then this would be my consolation, as I writhed in unsparing pains, that I did not suppress my words against the Holy One. What strength have I that I should endure? How long have I to live that I should be patient? Is my strength the strength of rock? Is my flesh bronze? Truly, I cannot help myself. I've been deprived of resourcefulness." Eliphaz, in his speech, had encouraged Job to turn to God and to present his case to God. In chapter 5, verse 8, Eliphaz had said what he would do under these circumstances, suggesting Job should do the same. He said, "But I would resort to God. I would lay my case before God." So Job is doing that now, in effect, that he's praying that his request to die, that we saw in chapter 3, is something that would be granted to him, that God may give me what I wished for. Would that God consented to crush me. Job sees that it would be an act of compassion for God to consent to crush him. He says, if he loosed his hand and cut me off. Verse 10 here is another verse that is difficult for the translators to put into English. And this is one of the problems with the book of Job, that there are a lot of words and phrases which use rare Hebrew words, and so the translators have difficulty in putting that into English. And if you're using a Bible which has some footnotes to help you, you might see footnotes throughout which indicate the particular word or a phrase where the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. So the translators are, in effect, trying to work out the best way to translate that. And that's why there are differences in some of the translations. And verse 10 here is one of those places where there is some difficulty, where he speaks of, as I writhed in unsparing pains, that I did not suppress my words against the Holy One. It seems perhaps that Job's consolation would be that he had not suppressed his words, that he had not held back in expressing his feelings about all of this. And Job feels that he doesn't have the strength to endure this suffering. He's asking, how long do I have to be patient with this? He doesn't have the strength to wait for God to put things right, as Eliphaz had urged him to do in chapter 5, verses 17 to 27. Eliphaz was telling him, just wait for God to sort things out. Well, Job says, I don't have time to wait. And here he says that he's not made of rock or bronze. He's not that strong to be able to endure this. He doesn't have the resources to endure it. It's not like he's like a rock or he's made of bronze. But Job must really have been physically, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted by this point in time, and that sort of comes through here in his words. Well, he then goes on in verses 14 to 30 of chapter 6 to express his disappointment at his friends in the strongest terms possible. He says here, a friend owes loyalty to one who fails, though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My comrades are fickle, like a wadi, like a bed on which streams once ran. They are dark with ice, snow obscures them. But when they thaw, they vanish. In the heat, they disappear where they are. Their course twists and turns. They run into the desert and perish. Caravans from Timur look to them. Processions from Sheba count on them. They are disappointed in their hopes. When they reach the place, they stand aghast. So you are as nothing. At the sight of misfortune, you take fright. Did I say to you, I need your gift? Pay a bribe for me out of your wealth. Deliver me from the clutches of my enemy. Redeem me from violent men. Teach me, I shall be silent. Tell me where I am wrong. How trenchant honest words are. But what sort of reproof comes from you? Do you devise words of reproof, but count a hopeless man's words as wind? You would even cast lots over an orphan or barter away your friend. Now be so good as to face me. I will not lie to your face. Relent. Let there not be injustice. Relent. I am still in the right. Is justice on my tongue? Can my palate not discern evil? Job's friends have not shown him that loyalty or kindness that he seeks. He says here, a friend owes loyalty to one who fails, though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. A New Revised Standard Version translates this as those who withhold kindness from a friend forsake the fear of the Almighty. Showing compassion and sympathy to a friend who is suffering is an important quality which Job feels is lacking in his friends. Job accuses his friends or his brothers or comrades of being fickle, describes them as being like a wadi, like a bed on which streams once ran. In that environment, a dry stream bed can suddenly be filled with water when the rains come, and then it very quickly becomes dry again. So in the same way, Job is suggesting that his friends are like that, that they are unreliable. And then another image is used in verse 16, where he says they are dark with ice, snow obscures them. Snow is pictured here as accumulating on the ice, and the melting snow and the ice would then become a torrent, which eventually vanishes and dries up in the heat. So these streams twist and turn, and they run into the desert, where in the end they perish. And he speaks here of travelers coming from Timar and Sheba who follow these tracks looking for water, and they're left disappointed. And Job then applies these pictures, these illustrations to his friends. He says, so you are as nothing. At the sight of misfortune, you take fright. So they're like these streams that disappear in the heat, that they're when trouble comes, they're gone. Or a New Revised Standard Version again puts it, such you have now become to me. You see my calamity and are afraid. You see this and you run away. So his friends have been no help to him. And Job then denies that he has asked them for a gift or a bribe, or that he is asked to be delivered from his enemies or redeemed from violent men. There's nothing in Eliphaz's speech earlier to suggest that Job had been accused of doing any of these things. Perhaps he's saying that he's not indebted to any of them, he's not asked anything of them, and so he feels that he can speak freely to them about their lack of compassion towards him. And then in verse 24 here, Job says that he is willing to be taught and willing to listen if they can tell me where I am wrong. You tell me where I've gone wrong, and I'm willing to listen to this. However, Job does not believe that they can tell him where he's gone wrong, because he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. In verse 25, he says, how trenchant honest words are, but what sort of reproof comes from you? Job is comparing his own honest words with his friends' criticism of him. They may devise their words of reproof against Job whilst discounting his words. They see the words of a hopeless man as wind, as something that is worthless. That's how they're viewing Job's words. In a strongly worded statement, Job accuses his friends of disloyalty, of being as heartless as casting lots over an orphan or bartering away a friend. Not clear exactly what he means by that. And he calls upon them then to look him in the face, whilst asserting his own honesty and his insistence that he is in the right and that they are the ones who should change or relent, change their opinion about him. So Job thinks that his reputation and his character is at stake here, that what they're saying, trying to undermine his character in some way. Well, after that expression of disappointment with his friends, we go on then into chapter 7. And in verses 1 to 10, Job sees his life as ending in nothing. He says here, truly man has a term of service on earth. His days are like those of a hireling, like a slave who longs for evening shadows, like a hireling who waits for his wage. So have I been allotted months of futility, nights of misery have been apportioned to me. When I lie down, I think, when shall I rise? Night drags on, and I am sated with tossings till morning twilight. My flesh is covered with maggots and clods of earth. My skin is broken and festering. My days fly faster than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope. Consider that my life is but wind. I shall never see happiness again. The eye that gazes on me will not see me. Your eye will seek me, but I shall be gone. As a cloud fades away, so whoever goes down to Sheol does not come up. He returns no more to his home. His place does not know him. Job sees his life on this earth as a term of service on earth, he says, like a slave who's waiting for the day to end, or like a hireling waiting for his wages at the end of the day. And for Job, life amounts, he says, to months of futility and nights of misery. We see here that Job is suffering from insomnia. He has sleepless nights. He goes to bed wondering when it will be time to get up, whilst the night drags on, and he describes himself as tossing and turning until the dawn. And then he vividly describes his flesh being covered in maggots and clods of earth, and his skin is broken and festering. He's describing here the physical effects of his suffering, the suffering inflicted upon him. As we saw in chapter 2, verse 7, that the Lord inflicted a severe inflammation on Job from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Some sort of skin disease or skin condition, and attracting the maggots. He speaks of those there. He speaks of his skin being broken and festering, becoming infected. And then he says that his days are likened to a weaver's shuttle that pulls the thread through the loom till the thread runs out. That the weaver sits at the loom, throwing the shuttle back and forth, taking the thread across the loom. And so he says, my days fly faster than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope. So Job senses that his life is coming to this end. It's like the wind or a breath. And the eye that seeks him, that's God, gazes upon him, will see him no more, and he will fade away like a cloud. James in chapter 4, verse 14 gives us a similar description there of life, of the transitory nature of life. James chapter 4, verse 4. He says, what is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Job using this similar picture here of a cloud or a wind or a breath that is there for a moment and then is gone. So Job sees his life fading away like that cloud. And then he speaks of those who go down to Sheol, Sheol being the place of the dead, where all the dead go and they don't return, and they are soon forgotten by those who are left here on earth. Again, in the Psalms, Psalm 103, the psalmist describes life in similar terms as well. Psalm 103, verses 15 and 16. He says, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, for the wind passes over it and it is gone, and its place knows it no more. So we're all here for a brief time and then we're gone, and then we're forgotten about. For Job, then, life is hard and miserable, and then you die, and it's all for nothing. Job then makes his complaint to God now in chapter 7, verses 11 to 21. He says here, on my part, I will not speak with restraint. I will give voice to the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I the sea or the dragon that you have set a watch over me? When I think my bed will comfort me, my couch will share my sorrow, you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions, till I prefer strangulation, death to my wasted frame. I am sick of it. I shall not live forever. Let me be, for my days are a breath. What is man that you make much of him, that you fix your attention upon him? You inspect him every morning, examine him every minute. Will you not look away from me for a while? Let me be till I swallow my spittle. If I have sinned, what have I done to you, watcher of men? Why make of me your target and a burden to myself? Why do you not pardon my transgression and forgive my iniquity? For soon I shall lie down in the dust. When you seek me, I shall be gone. Job, who had been so blessed by a relationship with God, has lost everything. His life is in ruins, and he doesn't know why. And seeking an answer, he now addresses God directly. He says that he will not speak with restraint, that he will give voice to the anguish of my spirit and complain in the bitterness of my soul. He's not going to hold anything back in telling God exactly how he feels. He's not going to suffer in silence. And he asks God, am I the sea or the dragon that you have set a watch over me? The sea here and the dragon are the names of mythological sea creatures of chaos or disorder that God must subdue in order to bring order to the world. As mentioned in Psalm 74, verses 12 to 17. Psalm 74, verse 12. Yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst divide the sea by thy might. Thou didst break the heads of the dragons on the waters. Thou didst crush the heads of Leviathan. Thou didst give him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. So speaking there of God crushing the dragons and Leviathan, who we mentioned last week. Thou didst cleave open springs and brooks, thou didst dry up ever-flowing streams. Thine is the day, thine also the night. Thou hast established the luminaries and the sun. Thou hast fixed all the bounds of the earth. Thou hast made summer and winter. So this sea dragon is this creature that causes disorder and chaos that God has to control. And in order to establish order in the creation. And so this is what Job is asking. Am I that sea dragon that you have to watch over me, that you have to control me in this way? Am I like that? Is Job such a threat that God has to place this watch over him? And then when Job thinks that going to bed will bring him rest and comfort, God then frightens him with dreams and terrifies him with visions, he says in verses 13 and 14 there. When I think my bed will comfort me, my couch will share my sorrow, you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions. And Job would prefer to be strangled rather than go through all of this. He would prefer death to life in this body, to my wasted frame, he speaks of there in verse 15. So Job has had enough of this life, and he just wishes that God would leave him alone and let him die. Verse 16, he says, I am sick of it. I shall not live forever. Let me be, for my days are a breath. Job asks why God is paying so much attention to him. In verses 17 and 18, he asks, what is man that you make much of him, that you fix your attention upon him? You inspect him every morning, examine him every minute. There's a similarity here between these words of Job and the words in Psalm 8, verses 4 to 6, but there's a difference in meaning between the two passages. In Psalm 8, verses 4 to 6. The psalmist says to God, "What is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou dost care for him? Yet thou hast made him little less than God, and dost crown him with glory and honour. Thou hast given him dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet." So here the psalmist is saying, is noting the insignificance of man, and yet God has given man his attention, and has entrusted man with this dominion over the creation. But Job, using the similar words, asks the same question: "What is man that you make much of him? That you examine him every minute?" So Job feels that he is being scrutinized by God every minute of the day, and he wishes that God would just leave him alone. In verse 19, he says, "Will you not look away from me for a while? Let me be till I swallow my spittle." That phrase, swallow my spittle, is an expression that means for a single moment. And the New International Version translates this as, "Let me alone even for an instant." Leave me alone for that brief moment that it takes just to swallow my spittle. Why don't you leave me alone just for that brief moment? Or to put it in today's terms, perhaps he's saying, "God, give me a break." Job admits that he has sinned, but not to the extent that it should bother God. In verse 20, he says, "If I have sinned, what have I done to you, watcher of men?" The word "if" is not in the Hebrew text here. He simply says, "I have sinned. What have I done to you, watcher of men?" So he refers to God here as the one who is constantly watching him, watcher of men, like as if God is this spy who's constantly watching what is going on. The Authorized Version translates that as preserver of men. It's one who watches over, and that can, of course, be understood in a good sense, that God watches over us in order to protect us and to deliver us. But as far as Job is concerned, it's not a good thing, that he doesn't like this scrutiny that he's being placed under. And then again, he says, "Why make of me your target and a burden to myself?" So again, back to the shooting of the arrows, that Job is God's target. Why has God been using Job for target practice? The second half of the statement there, "a burden to myself," is translated in other versions as, "Why have I become a burden to you?" Why am I such a burden to you, God? Job has confessed he is a sinner, but no sin he has committed deserves what he has had to suffer. So why does God not just pardon his transgression and forgive his iniquity, since Job shall soon lie down in the dust, and when God seeks him, he shall be no more? Job is trying to reason with God here by questioning the fairness of what has happened to him. Where is the justice in all of this? And Job is speaking out of his anguish and out of his anger. And if only Job could understand why this is happening to him, then his sufferings would be perhaps more bearable. To understand why something is going on is perhaps more helpful than not knowing the reason. As one commentator has said, his sufferings are so beyond the proportion of any sin he knows of that there must be some explanation beyond the categories of guilt and punishment. So this is something which is way beyond what he deserves. You think, well, if I have sinned, I deserve to be punished, but not to this extent. So this is not a case of the punishment fitting the crime. This has gone beyond that as far as Job is concerned. In summary here of just to summarize, first of all, what we saw last week in Eliphaz's speech in chapters 4 and 5, and then in Job's reply that we've looked at this evening. This is from one commentator here, John Walton, in his commentary, summarizes Eliphaz's speech in this way. Eliphaz saying to Job, you have counseled many in similar circumstances, and you should take your own advice. Trust in your piety. The retribution principle will hold. It is the wicked who perish. Yet from God's perspective, no mortal is righteous. Appeal to God and accept his discipline. That's a summary of Eliphaz, and a summary of Job's reply to that, as we've seen this evening. Job says, the extent of my misery justifies my outcry. I wish that he would put me to death. Then I would die with the consolation that at least I had assessed the situation realistically. I feel so helpless. I'm not sure I can continue, and my friends are of no help. I would be delighted if God could show me what I have done wrong. My miserable days will soon come to an end, so I may as well speak my mind. Why, O God, have you targeted me for such attention? No one could bear such scrutiny. Can't you show some tolerance before it is too late? So that's where we are with these speeches, and we'll be moving on next week to look at Bildad's first speech and Job's reply to that in chapters 8 to 10. As this develops further, this debate or this discussion develops further. There are a few questions here for this evening. Why did Job rebuke his friends? What did Job think would happen at death? How do you think Job views God? And do we have to understand God in order to have faith in him? So we will stop there.